They all laughed when he called me a failure of a father, but when my own daughter dropped her eyes and stayed silent, that's when it hit. He didn't just humiliate me, he erased me. 40 years of raising her, wiped clean by a man in a $1,000 suit. I nearly walked out, nearly let him win, but instead I slipped his company's logo into my pocket because I knew something he didn't. That little gold seal, it's hiding fraud so rotten it'll collapse his whole empire. And me, I've got 12 days and a war buddy with a ledger. He started this in front of 200 people. Now I'll finish it in front of the IRS. My name is Walter Bennett, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning, I sit at my worn kitchen table with a chipped coffee mug, listening to the world wake up while sawdust still clings to my work clothes from yesterday's job. My daughter Jessica married Victor Hammond, a wealthy investor who treats my decades of honest carpentry like some kind of failure. That man's practiced smile never reaches his eyes when he looks at my calloused hands. Such a waste of potential, he told our family at Christmas, making Jessica shrink in her seat. But he doesn't notice the careful way I catalogue every paper, every receipt, old habits from my army days that never left me. Sometimes the quietest opponent is the most dangerous. 1. Some men mistake patience for weakness, dignity for defeat. But let me start from the beginning. I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped into that ballroom. 40 years of working with wood teaches you to trust your instincts about crooked things, and everything about Victor's vow renewal ceremony screamed of a setup. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across marble floors, while some string quartet played music that probably cost more than my first house. You know the type of place where even the air feels expensive. My wife Martha squeezed my arm as we found our assigned table, way in the back near the kitchen doors. Typical Victor move, that. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago on thick cream paper with gold trim, and I'd actually thought it might be an olive branch. Shows what an old fool knows. Jessica, my daughter, kept darting these nervous glances our way between greeting guests. She had that same look she'd get as a kid when she knew a storm was coming. Remember how we'd count the seconds between lightning and thunder, trying to gauge how close it was? That's what it felt like in that ballroom, waiting for whatever Victor had planned to strike. "Dad," she'd whispered earlier, hugging me too tight. "Please, whatever happens, just stay calm, okay?" That should have been my second warning, but I just patted her back and promised I would. After all, what could happen at a vow renewal? The answer came after the main course, when Victor stood up and clinked his crystal glass. The room went quiet as he took the microphone, standing there in his $1,000 suit beneath that huge banner for Hammond Investment Group. His smile was all teeth and triumph. "Friends, family," he started, voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Tonight isn't just about renewing vows. It's about new beginnings." He paused, looking right at our table. "About building legacies on success, not on the failures of fathers who couldn't provide." The laughter rolled through the room like thunder. Martha's fingers trembled against her water glass. I sat there, spine straight as a level, while 40 years of dawn wake-ups, scraped knuckles, and honest work became their evening entertainment. You want to know the worst part? It wasn't the words themselves. Words are just air shaped by spite. No, it was watching faces I'd known for years, neighbors, church friends, parents of Jessica's old classmates, either laugh along or suddenly find their napkins fascinating. Only a handful met my eyes with something like shame or anger on my behalf. Jessica stared at the tablecloth, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to disappear. Little girl, who used to ride on my shoulders while I measured lumber, who'd painted "World's Best Dad" on a coffee mug I still keep in my workshop. All those memories reduced to a punchline for Victor's social climbing. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against marble. The room didn't exactly go quiet, but heads turned. Victor's eyes found mine across the distance, daring me to make a scene, to prove him right about the uncouth carpenter who didn't belong in his world. Instead, I picked up that fancy invitation folder with its embossed company seal and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Careful, deliberate movements, just like measuring twice before cutting once. Then I walked out to the terrace, leaving Martha to decide if she wanted to follow. The night air hit my face like a splash of cold water. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could see Victor watching, that smirk still playing around his mouth. He probably expected me to slink away into the dark, tail between my legs, but I straightened my tie, the one Jessica gave me last Father's Day, and walked right back inside. Let him think he'd won. A man who needs to publicly tear down his father-in-law isn't half as secure as he pretends to be. And that company logo on the invitation in my pocket? Something about it nagged at my memory, like a joint that doesn't quite fit flush. The drive home felt longer than usual. Maybe it was Martha's silence beside me, or maybe it was those laughs still echoing in my ears. Around midnight, I finally stepped into our kitchen, the one I'd remodeled 3 times over the years, each upgrade marking another decade of memories. The yellow lamp above the table clicked on with a familiar buzz. I pulled out that fancy invitation, laid it flat on the worn oak surface. Funny how something so elegant could feel like evidence in my hands. The Hammond Investment Group logo caught the light, all swooping lines and gold foil, trying its best to look important. "Walter?" Martha called softly from the hallway. "Coming to bed?" "Soon," I answered, not taking my eyes off that paper. "Just need to check something first." You ever have one of those moments where a random memory suddenly feels important? Like finding an old receipt. That explains why that tool went missing. Something Victor had said at a Christmas dinner last year floated back to me. "The auditors love me. I make their job easy." He'd laughed then, swirling his bourbon, but now that comment stuck like a splinter under my skin. I grabbed my reading glasses and the notepad I keep by the phone. The invitation's fine print was a maze of affiliate companies and registration numbers. My carpenter's hands, used to marking precise measurements, moved slow and steady as I copied everything down. P.O. box addresses in states I'd never visited, names that sounded more like tongue twisters than real businesses. The coffee maker gurgled to life, my 3rd cup of the night. Down the hall, Martha's soft breathing had settled into sleep. I should have joined her, should have let Victor's cruel joke fade into tomorrow. But pride's a funny thing. Sometimes it's foolish, sure, but sometimes it's the only thing keeping you standing straight. The bottom drawer of my desk still held that old army address book, leather cracked but binding solid. I flipped through pages yellowed by time until I found the number I needed. Frank Miller. We'd shared sand, stories, and discipline in a desert half a world away. These days he was a retired accountant who knew more about financial paper trails than anyone I'd ever met. My mobile phone felt heavy as I set it next to the notepad. Frank would understand about pride and principle. We'd learned those lessons together. But this wasn't just about my bruised ego anymore. Jessica's face flashed in my mind, the way she'd looked down at that tablecloth. Whatever I started here would splash back on her. Steam rose from my coffee mug, and I remembered something my own father used to say. A man who mocks honest work usually has something to hide. The thought settled my hands. I picked up the phone. First ring, second, third. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and I wondered if I was being foolish, calling at this hour. 4th ring. "Walter!" Frank's voice came through clear and alert, like he'd been waiting for the call. "This better be good, old friend. Some of us actually sleep at night." The Bell's Diner sign flickered in the early morning fog as I pulled into the parking lot. 7:30 sharp. Old habits die hard, especially army ones. Through the window I could already see Frank at our usual booth, his briefcase propped beside a stack of folders. Some things never change, and Frank's punctuality was one of them. The bell above the door jangled as I stepped in. You know that smell that hits you in places like this? Coffee mixed with bacon and just a hint of maple syrup? Takes me back to job. Sites, planning the day's work over breakfast with my crew. "You look like hell," Frank said as I slid into the booth. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the fluorescent light, making him look more professor than retired number cruncher. "Yeah. Well, you try sleeping after what I told you on the phone." I pulled out the manila envelope I'd prepared. Made copies of everything this morning. The waitress, her name tag read Betty, stopped by with coffee. Frank waited until she was out of earshot before spreading the papers across the table. Ever see someone's whole demeanor change when they're in their element? That was Frank right there, transforming from my old army buddy into the accountant who'd spent 30 years hunting financial smoke and mirrors. "All right," he said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. "We start with the basics. Secretary of State filings for every company listed here. Then, SEC portal searches. In English, Frank." He smiled, the kind of smile that said he'd expected that response. "We're going to track every business name connected to your son-in-law. Where they're registered, who owns them, how money moves between them. Like following lumber deliveries to job sites, everything leaves a trail. For the next hour, we built a checklist. Frank's neat handwriting filled 3 pages with websites, forms, and search, terms I needed to learn. The morning crowd thinned out around us, leaving just the quiet clink of coffee cups and the scratch of Frank's pen. See these names? He circled 3 companies on the invitation. They echo. Same words, just shuffled around. Classic layering technique. Layering? Making money hard to follow. Like, imagine building a house with fake walls inside fake walls. You're going to be looking for the real structure underneath. I spent that afternoon at the library, printer humming as I pulled document after document. My old blueprint case came in handy, perfect for organizing everything by date. Funny how skills transfer. Years of keeping job sites straight helped me sort through the paper maze. Match these investor letters against the returns, Frank had said, handing me a highlighter. Look for numbers that don't line up. By evening, my kitchen table looked like a war room. Martha took one look and decided to visit her sister, just squeezed my shoulder on her way out. She knew that focused silence of mine from decades of watching me work through tough projects. The pattern jumped out around midnight. Month-end valuations that didn't match their own previous reports. But what really got my attention was this acronym that kept showing up. PNGF. 4 times a page in the deposit columns. I called Frank. Come over, I said. Need your eyes on this. 20 minutes later, we stood over the spread of papers. I'd laid them out in clean lines, just like I used to arrange blueprints for client reviews. Frank moved down the row, tapping each sheet with his pen. His shoulders got tighter with every page. Give it to me straight, I said. What am I looking at? Frank's eyes narrowed behind those wire rims. He stopped at one column, pen frozen mid-tap. Pensions, he said quietly. Just that one word, but it hit like a hammer to the chest. Frank and I camped out in my garage workshop for the next 2 days. Seemed fitting somehow. I'd spent 40 years in spaces like this, turning raw materials into something solid. Only difference was now we were building a case instead of a house. Here's another one, Frank said, squinting at his laptop. 3 million transferred to Hammond Capital Partners, then split 4 ways into, he traced his finger across a printout, Riverside Holdings, Blue Peak Investments, Cornerstone Asset Group, and back to Hammond Investment Group. Ever watch someone solve one of those sliding puzzle games? That's what it felt like, pieces shifting until the picture emerged. My workbench, usually covered in sawdust and wood shavings, was now a maze of bank statements and corporation papers. You, for getting this down? Frank asked. I nodded, writing in the same block letters I'd used on lumber orders for decades. Simple, clear. Can't afford mistakes when you're cutting expensive wood or tracking dirty money. The memo grew line by line, dates, dollar amounts, company names. Each entry checked twice, just like measuring twice before cutting once. Martha brought us sandwiches around noon, her face pinched with worry. Walter, she said, hovering by the door. Maybe we should let this go. Victor's not the type to... To what? I kept writing. To let someone stand up to him. She sighed, that deep sigh wives perfect over 50 years of marriage. He has resources, connections, and Sarah. Her voice caught on our daughter's name. Sarah. My girl hadn't returned my calls in 3 days. The one time she picked up, her voice was thin as tissue paper. Dad, please, she'd whispered. Just drop it. Then silence. This isn't about getting even, I told Martha, though my grip tightened on the pen. It's about protecting people. You've seen these pension numbers, regular folks who worked their whole lives, trusting him with their futures. Frank cleared his throat. Walter, look at this filing date. I leaned over his shoulder. There it was, buried in the fine print. Q3 external audit sign-off, scheduled for the 17th. My stomach dropped. Today's the 5th, Frank said quietly. 12 days. That's all we had before some accountant stamped these books clean, making Victor's house of cards look solid as concrete. I grabbed the shop calendar off its nail, circled the 17th in red marker, and wrote, before sign-off underneath. The clock above my tool rack ticked louder than usual, or maybe that was just my pulse in my ears. If we don't move before that audit. Frank didn't need to. Finish. Then it all gets buried, I said, and those pension holders never know what hit them. My phone buzzed on the workbench. Unknown number. The message was pure Victor. Short, sharp, and designed to sting. "Careful where you wander, old man." Frank read it over my shoulder. He knows. Course he knows. I set the phone down carefully, the way you handle a tool that might bite back. Man like that probably has people watching his paper trail. You ever notice how a threat can actually steady your nerves, like when a saw blade starts to bind, that moment of focus that comes with danger? I picked up my pen again, checked the next bank statement against our timeline. "Doesn't change anything," I said. "We keep building the case, every number verified, every transfer tracked." Martha appeared in the doorway again, wringing her hands. "Walter, I know, dear," I met her eyes, "but some things need doing even when they're hard. You taught me that." She nodded slowly, understanding in her face even through the worry. After all, she'd watched me rebuild porches in December snow and frame houses through August heat. Some jobs you finish because they're right, not because they're easy. Frank adjusted his glasses, turned back to his laptop. "Next transfer batch." "Next batch," I agreed, checking my watch against the calendars. Red circle. 12 days to protect my daughter's future, even if she couldn't see it yet. 12 days to give hundreds of strangers their retirement savings back. Plenty of time, if we didn't waste it. Next morning, I laid out my new routine like I used to map framing schedules. You learn planning on construction sites. Morning light for detail work, afternoon sun for checking your lines. This job needed the same discipline. Mornings are for filings, I told Frank over coffee. Afternoons we confirm everything, evenings we cross-check our work. He nodded, already spreading papers across my kitchen table. Like building a house. Foundation first. You know that satisfaction when a level shows true. That's how it felt watching our evidence stack up. Every morning I'd trace company registrations while Frank tracked money flows. By lunch, we'd have new leads to chase. Afternoons, we'd verify each piece, calling brokers with careful questions, checking timestamps on transfers. Come evening, we'd compare notes over my landline, the kind of phone that can't be hacked like those smart ones. Remember those old-school reading lamps with the green glass shades? I had one lighting our work, throwing clean shadows across investor brochures that promised the moon. "Guaranteed 15% annual returns," one claimed. Frank snorted. "Show me these miracle profits," he muttered. We laid custodian statements beside the promises. Numbers didn't match, not even close. The more we dug, the wider the gap grew between what Victor claimed and what the accounts showed. "Got to make this simple for the regulators," Frank said. "They're busy people." So we built our case like I'd build a house. Clean lines, solid structure. One-page summary up front, everything indexed, exhibits labeled. Even used those little sticky tabs, color-coded. By the 6th day we had a packet that would make a librarian proud. I traced the route to the state office 3 times, practicing what I'd say. Simple truths, no emotions. Just facts about numbers that didn't add up. My phone buzzed while I was checking the final exhibits. Another unknown number. This time it was a photo, my own driveway, taken that morning, showing my truck and Frank's car. Below it, 2 words, "Getting crowded." I deleted it quick, but the damage was done. That night the porch light seemed dimmer than usual, throwing strange shadows. Made me think of all the times I'd worked late on job sites, never afraid of the dark. Now every creak made me look twice. "Last piece," Frank said the next evening, pointing to a shell company listing. "Look at the beneficial owner." I squinted at the fine print, then saw it. The company name, scrambled Victor's initials, VDH Holdings. Amateur move, really, like signing your name to a crime. "That's our link," Frank said quietly. "Direct line right to—" A soft scrape cut him off. The garage door, the one that always stuck in humidity. We both froze. Footsteps whispered past the kitchen window. Slow, deliberate. My hand found the phone, finger hovering over the emergency dial. Frank's breathing went shallow. We waited, muscles tight as the steps faded into the night. "They're trying to rattle us," Frank said after a minute. "Working, too." I switched on another lamp, pushed back against the shadows. "But we're too close to stop." Frank nodded, turned back to our binder. His hands were steady as he added the final document, that company listing with Victor's hidden signature. The evidence packet was complete. I looked at the kitchen clock, counted days until the audit. 5 left. Just 5 days to get this to the right people, before Victor's lies became official truth. "You sure about the delivery plan?" Frank asked. "State office opens at 8, I said. "We walk in, hand it over, walk out. Simple as hanging a door." But we both knew it wouldn't be that easy. Not with eyes watching, phones clicking, shadows testing locks. The proof was solid. We'd built it stronger than any house I ever framed. Now came the hard part, getting it where it needed to go while Victor's people played their games of fear. Frank gathered his coat, checked the window before heading to his car. I stood in the doorway until his taillights disappeared, then double-checked every lock. The garage door's creak still echoed in my mind as I settled in for another night of watching shadows, guarding our work, waiting for dawn. The email arrived just after breakfast. "Come by the office. 10. Short and cold like Victor himself. You ever notice how some buildings just smell like money? Hammond Investment Group took up 3 floors of polished granite and glass, the kind of place where even the air feels expensive. The security guard checked my ID twice. Guess they don't see many guys with calloused hands coming through. Victor's corner office stretched wider than my first house. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a postcard, and his desk could have served dinner for 12. I kept my worn leather binder zipped tight against my leg while he made me wait, tapping at his computer. "Walter?" He didn't look up. "Sit." I took the chair across from him, fighting the urge to check my shirt collar. Funny how some men can make you feel small without even trying. "I hear you've been investigating." Now he looked at me, that practiced smile never reaching his eyes. "Making calls, requesting documents. Just trying to understand things," I said carefully. "At your age?" He leaned back, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "Must be confusing, all these complex business matters. Numbers can blur together when you're pushing 80. I felt my jaw tighten but kept quiet. Let him talk. "Here's what concerns me," Victor continued. "If your elderly confusion leads you to share misunderstandings with certain authorities, there could be unfortunate consequences." "What kind of consequences?" His smile thinned. "Your daughter enjoys a very comfortable lifestyle. Private schools for the kids, vacation homes, monthly allowances. Would be a shame if marital asset restrictions suddenly limited her access." The threat hung there, sharp as a nail ready to pierce skin. I watched him pour himself water from a crystal decanter, taking his time. "Just to be clear," I said, "you're saying if I talk to regulators, you'll cut her off." "I'm saying confused old men sometimes need reminding where their family's best interests lie." Ice clinked in his glass. "We wouldn't want Sarah paying for misguided concerns." The ride home felt longer than usual. Each traffic light gave me too much time to think about Victor's words, about choices and consequences. Sarah's car was in my driveway when I pulled up. She sat on the porch steps, hands twisted in her lap. Her eyes were red, cheeks blotched from crying. "Daddy, please." She stood as I approached. "Victor told me what you're doing. You have to stop." "Sarah, you'll ruin everything." Her voice cracked. "The kids' school, our home, everything we've built. Please, Daddy, let it go." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The little girl who used to ride on my shoulders was now a woman, terrified of losing her world. We went inside, and the family photos lining the hallway seemed to watch us. 40 years of memories. Sarah's first bike ride, high school graduation, her wedding day, every sacrifice, every extra shift I'd worked to give her a better life, all of it hanging there in wooden frames. With shaking fingers, I dialed Frank's number. The line clicked alive. "Victor made his move," I said quietly, explaining the office, meeting, the threats, Sarah's tears. Frank's breathing was the only response for a long moment. "Frank, I hear you," he said finally. I closed my study door, stared at the calendar where the audit date glared back in red ink. 12 days of work sat in that binder, proof of every lie Victor had told. With heavy hands, I pulled open my desk drawer and slid it inside. Sarah's heels clicked on the hardwood as she left. Through the window, I watched her taillights disappear down the street, taking with them all my certainty about right and wrong. The house fell silent, just me and the ticking clock, counting down to an audit that would make Victor's crimes official. Unless I found the strength to stand up one more time. Ever notice how a house changes after midnight? The familiar corners turn strange, and every creak feels like a warning. I spent that night pacing between my desk and the kitchen sink, listening to the wall clock mock my indecision with its steady ticking. The coffee went cold in my favorite mug, the chipped blue one my grandson painted years ago. Sarah's words kept echoing. "Please, Daddy, let it go." Each time I reached for the phone to call Frank, I'd see her tear-stained face and pull back. Around 2 in the morning, I sat down to write Frank a note. My pen scratched across the paper. Maybe Victor's right. I'm just a tired old man who should... I couldn't finish. The shame of those words hit me like a physical blow. I crumpled the paper and threw it across the room. You know what it reminded me of? Those brutal army mornings in Korea, rain soaking through our jackets while we shivered in formation. Sergeant used to bark the same thing every time. Finish the mission, then warm your hands. Simple as that. No excuses, no compromise. The memory stirred something in my gut. I thought about all those pension folders in my evidence binder, regular folks who'd trusted their retirement to Victor's smooth promises. Good people who'd worked hard, saved, careful, believed in the system, just like I'd believed in Victor when he married my daughter. When the first grey light crept through my kitchen window, I picked up the phone. Frank answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. "I'm scared, Frank," I admitted, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. "Not for me, for Sarah, for what this'll do to her life. I know, Walt." His voice was steady, grounding. "But you're more scared of what happens if we don't stop him." "Yeah." I rubbed my eyes. "Think we can make it stick before that audit signs off?" "Already got it mapped out." Papers rustled on his end. "We deliver to multiple regulators first thing tomorrow. Get everything time-stamped at intake. Keep copies locked in my safety deposit box." I pulled out a fresh legal pad and took notes while Frank laid it out. We needed clear language, no emotions. Just facts, figures, and paper trails that even a rushed auditor couldn't ignore. The kind of evidence that makes bureaucrats sit up straight and reach for their supervisors. For the next hour, we rehearsed my delivery. Short sentences, direct answers, no rambling about personal grievances or family drama, just the math and the documents, letting Victor's own paperwork do the talking. I spent the morning preparing exhibits and pre-addressing envelopes to every regulatory office on Frank's list. State authorities, federal agencies, ethics boards. By noon, my dining room table looked like a mail room, but every packet was organized, sealed, and ready. Margaret came in while I was double-checking the labels, wife of 52 years. She could read my face better than any book. "You're going through with it," she said. Not a question. "Have to, Marge." I took her hand. "Victor's stealing from people who can't afford to lose, using their pension money like his personal piggy bank." She squeezed my fingers. "Sarah won't understand, not at first." "I know." My throat felt tight. "But maybe someday she'll see I did it for her, too. Teaching her kids that. Wrong is wrong no matter who does it." Margaret touched my cheek, her palm soft against my stubble. "What do you need from me?" "Just this." I pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "Just knowing you understand." We stood there a moment, holding each other like we had through every hard choice in our marriage. Then I went back to work, laying out the sealed packets beside my car keys. Set the alarm for 5 a.m., early enough to beat the traffic, late enough for the government buildings to be open. The living room grew dim as evening settled in. Our old grandfather clock, a wedding gift from Margaret's father, chimed midnight. Audit day had arrived. I sat in my armchair, watching shadows stretch across the carpet. In a few hours, I'd load those packets into my car and drive toward a morning that would change everything. No turning back now. I pulled out of my driveway at 5:15 a.m., the sealed packet secure in my briefcase. Through my rearview mirror, I spotted Frank's sedan falling into position 3 cars back, just like we'd planned. You learn a thing or two about convoy tactics in the army, even as a carpenter. The streets were empty except for delivery trucks and early shift workers clutching travel mugs. Funny how normal everything looked, considering what we were about to do. Remember those moments before a big change? When the world holds its breath but doesn't know it yet? The state office complex rose ahead of me, all glass and granite trying to look important. I'd helped build the contractor's annex 20 years back. My hands had touched those support beams before the walls went up. Now here I was coming back to tear down something else. Frank parked in the visitor's lot while I pulled into the drop-off zone. We'd agreed, separate entries, no obvious connection. Just 2 old men arriving for routine business. The lobby guard looked barely awake when I signed the visitor log. My penmanship was steady. Walter Bennett, 7:02 a.m., records intake appointment. The date would matter later. "Second floor, room 214, the guard mumbled, handing me a clip-on badge. The elevator smelled of floor wax and coffee. Down the hall, a nameplate read, "Regulatory Records Intake." My knock echoed in the empty corridor. "Come in." A woman with steel-grey hair and reading glasses looked up from her computer. Her nameplate said, "Ms. Pearson." "Morning." I kept my voice casual. "I have some documentation for regulatory review. Time-sensitive materials." She nodded toward a counter space. "Forms are there. Fill out the top sheet, attach it to your materials." My hands didn't shake as I wrote. Years of precise measurements and level cuts had taught me steadiness under pressure. I clipped the intake form to our sealed packet and slid everything across. Ms. Pearson opened the first exhibit tab. Her eyebrows lifted slightly at the pension fund headers. She flipped another page, then another. Her fingers slowed down. "This is substantial," she said carefully. "Have you retained copies?" "Yes, ma'am." "Secured off-site?" She reached for a date stamp, pressed it firmly on our cover sheet, then printed a receipt. "We'll review and route appropriately. Please keep this receipt for your records." Frank was waiting by the lobby coffee station, pretending to read a newspaper. I poured myself a cup of what looked like tar and sat 2 chairs away. "Receipts in my pocket," I muttered behind my cup. "Time-stamped 7:18 a.m. He turned a page. "Good. I've got the backup email drafted if we don't hear anything by noon. 1 button, and the executive summary hits to every department head on my list." The coffee tasted like it had been burning since yesterday, but I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Back home, I scanned the receipt into a folder named Insurance, then drove the original to Frank's house. He tucked it into his safe beside our backup copies. Double redundancy, another army habit that stuck. The rest of the morning crawled by. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the clock tick toward the audit deadline. Every few minutes I refreshed my email, hoping for some acknowledgement from the regulators. Nothing. 10 a.m. The audit team would be settling in, spreading their papers across Victor's conference room. 11 a.m. They'd be deep in their checklists now, comparing numbers that wouldn't add up. 11:45 a.m. 15 minutes until the scheduled sign-off. My screen stayed stubbornly empty. The grandfather clock struck noon. I pictured Victor, smug in his corner office, waiting for the all-clear that would lock his facade in place. One more quarter, one more audit. The house phone rang, startling me. Unknown number, but the area code matched the state offices. I picked up, my heart suddenly loud in my ears. "Hello?" "Mr. Bennett speaking. This is Angela Chen from the State Securities Division." Her voice was clipped, professional. "I'm confirming receipt of your documentation package this morning. We've begun preliminary review." "Thank you." I kept my own voice steady. The audit timing was a concern. "Yes, we noted that. Rest assured, appropriate steps are being taken." A pause. "We may need to contact you for clarification. Please maintain availability. I'll be here." The line clicked dead. I set the phone down carefully, like it might shatter if I moved too fast. You know that feeling when you've launched something big, and all you can do is wait? That's where I was. The next week stretched like old rubber. Grey mornings bled into quiet afternoons while I kept my hands busy and my mouth shut. My wife would give me these questioning looks over coffee, but I just shook my head. No point in spreading the weight until we knew it would stick. I spent hours stacking firewood, letting the rhythm of lift, stack, repeat clear my head. The sharp scent of split oak brought back memories of teaching my daughter to build a proper fire, how proud she'd been when her first stack drew clean and hot. Strange how the mind wanders when you're waiting for something to break. The regulators sent short, formal emails, received additional materials, review proceeding, timeline updated. Each one clicked into place like another nail in a frame, building towards something solid. Then it hit. I was having my morning coffee when the news alert flashed across my tablet. Breaking, regulators, freeze Hammond Investment Group accounts, pending review. My hands weren't quite steady as I expanded the article. The words jumped out like they were printed in neon. State regulators have frozen all accounts associated with Hammond Investment Group amid allegations of systematic financial irregularities, falsified ledger entries spanning multiple quarters, network of undisclosed affiliate entities. A smaller headline crawled across the bottom. IRS Criminal Division coordinating with state investigation. I read it aloud to make it real, my voice echoing in the quiet kitchen. Each word landed like a hammer strike. Falsified, undisclosed, criminal. The truth was finally wearing its proper name. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Victor. His voice had lost its smooth edge. You senile old... A pause, then muffled voices. No, I need to take this call. What do you mean they're already... The message cut off. I could picture him in his glass office, watching his carefully built walls start to crack. Made me think of teaching my daughter about houses, how even the fanciest mansion needs an honest foundation. I looked out at our street, remembering all those wedding guests who'd laughed at Victor's toast. By now they'd be seeing the headlines too, whispering different kinds of words. Funny how fast laughter can turn to whispers when the wind changes. The article printed clean and crisp. I slipped it into the evidence binder right next to that time-stamped receipt from the regulators. They looked right together, cause and effect, neat as dovetail joints. The doorbell rang sharp enough to make me jump. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of dark suits, official-looking cars. I straightened my collar, took a deep breath. Time to open the door and face whatever came next. I opened the door expecting suits and badges. Instead, there stood Margaret Wheeler from 3 doors down. The same Margaret who'd thrown her head back laughing at Victor's toast that night. Walter, She twisted her fingers, eyes fixed somewhere around my left shoulder. I just wanted to check if you needed anything. The news this morning. I'm doing fine, Margaret. My voice came out gentler than I'd planned. Sometimes watching someone squirm isn't as satisfying as you'd think. None of us knew, of course. She rushed the words. The way he spoke about you, if we'd had any idea. I remembered her laugh, sharp as breaking glass. But standing there now, she looked smaller somehow, like guilt had pressed her down at the shoulders. Water under the bridge, I said, meaning it mostly. The smell of coffee drifted up from my mug, reminding me of manners. Would you like to come in? Oh, no. She backed away a step. I should let you, with everything happening. She gestured vaguely at nothing and hurried back down my walk. I watched her go, thinking how reputation's a funny thing, fragile as veneer but heavy as oak when it shifts. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Is Sarah okay? Tell me the kids are all right? Does she need a place to stay? I answered each one the same way. Sarah's processing. Family matters stay private. Thank you for asking. No need to feed the whispers, even kind ones. The phone rang proper then. Sarah herself. My daughter's voice sounded thin, stretched like old elastic. Dad, have you seen the news? I have. I kept my tone, steady, like when I used to check her scraped knees. How are you holding up? I don't know, The accounts are all frozen. Victor's he's not talking to anyone. His lawyer says... She took a shaky breath. What do I do? First thing, get your own counsel, not his firm's, not his friends'. Someone who's only looking at your interests. I'd practiced this part in my head. Second thing, keep quiet. Let the process work. Did you know? She wasn't asking about the fraud. When you started looking, did you know it would end like this? I knew something wasn't right. I thought about that invitation folder, how one thread pulled had unraveled everything. The rest was just following the evidence. She was quiet so long I thought we'd lost the connection. Then, I should have listened when you tried to tell me about him. Years ago. You loved him. That's what people do, trust who they love. Yeah. Another pause. Aunt Helen called. She wants to host dinner next week. Says we need normal family time right now. I glanced at the evidence binder on my shelf. Funny how light it looked now, like it had passed its weight to other shoulders. She invited me too just before you called. Will you come? I thought about that table. Helen's good china. Careful conversations, sideways glances. Nothing normal about it, not anymore. But maybe that was the point. I'll be there. Won't say much, but I'll be there. Thanks, Dad. Her voice steadied a bit. For everything. After we hung up, I checked Helen's text again. Saturday at 7, her famous pot roast. Just family. I typed back a simple, yes, thank you, wondering who would break the ice first. Who would dare raise a glass? I made fresh coffee and settled into my workshop chair, letting the familiar smells of sawdust and varnish wash over me. The morning light caught the binder's edge, making the plain black cover shine like polished wood. Tomorrow would bring its own questions, but for now, the weight was lifted. The truth had found its level, same as water always does. Helen's house looked exactly as I remembered. Warm yellow windows, herb garden neat as pins, screen door that never quite closed right. You ever notice how some places stay the same even when everything else has turned upside down? I heard voices before I reached the porch, that particular murmur of family trying to act natural. Sarah's car was already there, parked a little crooked like she'd been in a hurry. I straightened my collar, more habit than vanity, and knocked. Helen pulled the door wide, wrapped me in a hug that smelled like pot roast and her fancy lavender soap. "Right on time," she said, like this was any other Saturday dinner. The dining room hit me with memories. Christmases, birthdays, graduations spread across that broad oak table. Tonight it was set with the good china, silver-polished, bright as promises. But something felt different, like the air itself had gotten heavier. And there he was, Victor Hammond, perched at the far end like a grey ghost of himself. His phone lay face down beside his empty wine glass, ignored for once. The untouched fork gleamed against his napkin. Those perfectly tailored suits of his seemed to hang loose now, like they'd been borrowed from someone else's closet. Sarah sat halfway down, managing a small smile when she saw me. I gave her a gentle nod and took my seat directly across from Victor. Didn't stare, didn't need to. Just settled in and let conversation wash around me like water around a stone. "Pass the potatoes. Weather's turning nice." "Helen, these rolls are perfect." Words drifted between careful pauses, dancing around the elephant in the room. I buttered my roll, added a dash of salt to my potatoes, and waited for the inevitable moment when someone would suggest toasts. It came from Cousin Peter, always the peacemaker. "Should we—" He lifted his glass uncertainly. All eyes swung to Victor's end of the table. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at some point beyond the window where darkness pressed against the glass. I cleared my throat softly and raised my water glass. Kept it simple, the way simple things often work best. Grateful for this food, grateful for family, grateful that truth finds its way home. Set the glass down without another word. You could have heard a pin drop on Helen's thick carpet. A dozen pairs of eyes bounced between Victor and me like a tennis match where only one player showed up. He never did give that speech they were hoping for, just pushed his peas around his plate, leaving damp trails like tiny green roads to nowhere. Didn't need to say more myself. The math was right there on the table between us, plain as salt and pepper. Everyone had read the headlines, done their own calculations about pensions and promises and pride. I finished my pot roast, Helen always could cook, and stood to help clear dishes. Old habits die hard, and besides it gave my hands something useful to do. In the kitchen, Helen touched my arm. "Need a ride home later?" "Think I'll walk," I said. Nice night for it. Back in the dining room, I said my goodbyes. Hugged Sarah extra long, whispered "You're stronger than you know" against her hair, shook a few hands, promised to call soon. Victor never looked up. The night air felt clean in my lungs as I started down Helen's driveway. Street lights made lazy pools on the sidewalk, and somewhere a dog barked at shadows. I pulled out the folded newspaper clipping I'd been carrying all day. Lakefront cabin, cash offers only, private sale. The listing had caught my eye that morning. Nothing fancy, just a solid little place with good bones, and a view worth waking up to. Perfect spot for quiet mornings with coffee and a fishing rod, maybe even space for grandkids to visit once the dust settled. I touched the paper in my pocket, feeling its crisp edges. Sometimes victory doesn't need fireworks. Sometimes it's just the soft click of a key in a lock that's all your own. The gravel crunched under my boots as I pulled up to the cabin. Tom Miller, no relation to Frank, stood waiting on the weathered porch, keys jingling in his weathered hands. He had that easy manner of someone who'd spent his life on the water, teaching his kids to fish and his grandkids to skip stones. "Ready for the grand tour?" he asked, extending a calloused hand. You know what I noticed first? The smell. Cedar and pine, with that crisp lake air that reminds you what clean really means. Reminded me of building my first house way back when Sarah was just learning to walk. Tom led me through, pointing out solid craftsmanship that spoke my language. I ran my hand along the exposed beams, felt the honest grain of real wood. In the basement, I checked the joists with my flashlight, straight as soldiers, not a sign of rot or strain. The previous owner had known what he was doing. "Foundation's good," Tom said, reading my mind. "Poor dates from '62, but she's holding true." "Like she was built yesterday," I agreed, tapping the concrete. We worked our way back up, and I took my time with each room. The kitchen needed updating, sure, but the bones were there. Windows faced the lake, catching light that danced across the worn floorboards. A stone fireplace anchored the living room, its hearth wide enough for winter nights and family stories. Out on the dock, wavelets lapped at the pilings, while a pair of ducks paddled past. The water stretched out green and deep, promising base in the shadows. Behind us, the cabin sat like it had grown straight from the shoreline, simple and right. I pulled out my checkbook, the same one I'd used to track every nail and board for 40 years of honest work. "Think we can wrap this up?" 20 minutes later, Tom handed me 2 brass keys. "She's yours now. Treat her well." I stood on that porch after he left, letting the moment sink in. Somewhere in the city, Victor Hammond was watching his empire crumble. The SEC had his accounts frozen tight as winter. Word was the IRS had brought in their Special Investigations Unit, the kind that doesn't smile much and never forgets a decimal point. But it wasn't just the legal noose that was strangling him. Those fancy friends who'd laughed at his jokes, who'd smirked when he mocked my calluses, they were scrambling to distance themselves now. Amazing how fast a country club membership card can turn to ash in your wallet. The drive home felt lighter somehow. I pulled into my driveway just as the evening was softening into dusk. Inside, I walked straight to the mantel and set those cabin keys down next to the regulator's receipt, that time-stamped proof that truth finds its own level. I picked up the phone and dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the second ring. "Dad? Got something to tell you, sweetheart. Just bought a little place up at Miller's Lake. Nothing fancy, but it's got a spare room that's going to need someone to break it in." A pause, then, That sounds really nice, Dad. Door's always open. Whenever you're ready." After we hung up, I stood in my living room, listening to the tick of the old wall clock. Struck a match, set the kindling catching in the fireplace. Cedar smoke curled up the chimney, carrying with it all those months of tension and worry. You don't need headlines to rebuild pride. Don't need revenge or grand gestures. Just need to know who you are and stand there steady, like a well-built house in a storm. I reached over and laid my palm across those brass keys, still cool against the warm wood of the mantel. Found myself speaking out loud to the quiet room. Real wealth is dignity you can't steal.